Hi Connelly Clan fam! Today we're talking about adopting children with behaviors. Now Sean and I have a lot of experience with this, and I think it is something really important to know, especially if you're thinking about adopting. So one of the first things I want to say about this is that I think it's important for everyone to know a little bit about this topic because, number one, obviously children that are in foster care, regardless of whether they're going to be adopted, can have behaviors. So it could be foster children, it could be if you adopt from foster care, it could be if you adopt from another country and choose to go that way. Sometimes, if you know of somebody that is adopting, it's good to know about behaviors because sometimes it has nothing to do with the parents. And everybody, I feel like, not everybody, but I feel like a lot of times people want to judge the parents when, the parents are doing the best they can and they're doing all they can. I've had several children who have had meltdowns in the grocery store, and I was so embarrassed. And, you don't want to appear like you're too nice and you don't want to appear like you're too mean, and you're worried about getting judged either way. And it can feel like a really helpless feeling. I felt that multiple times when I was at the store and worried about what everybody around me was thinking. Now, I've also been the person who looked at somebody who had a child melting down, and this was before I went through any of this, and I said, man, how come they can't get their child under control? So I've been on both ends. And I was obviously naive when I thought that. Once I had experienced that, I thought, oh gosh, now I get it. And so I think it's just important to know, because if you see somebody out there and they have a child who is melting down, and just maybe give them a little bit of grace, because that is a really tough spot to be in. Now, I think that working with children that have behaviors, Sean and I, that is what we do. A lot of our kids have behaviors. They're high needs with behaviors. You can take high needs medical, and we just take high needs with behaviors. So that is what we started working with. We were familiar with that because my biological daughter, Brianna, who is now in her 20s, she had a lot of behaviors starting at age 2 and going all the way up until about 20. So, and she still struggles now with things, but she gave us a lot of experience working with different behaviors at different ages. So once we got into foster care and we started working with the kids, we were able to work with the high needs behaviors because we felt comfortable doing that. We had experience in that. Now, even if you don't have experience in that, that doesn't mean that you can't gain experience in that because absolutely, as long as you're willing to persevere through that, and that is really number one. The number one thing that you need is perseverance. You have to be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to give up. I am going to exhaust every single option that I can, trying to get this child into a place where those behaviors start to go away. And that does happen. Now, we have worked with kids where sometimes it takes a long time. So we have had a child that it took about 2 or 3 years before we finally got her to a place where she was just in a really good spot. Now, that doesn't mean that she had high behaviors every single day, all 3 years. That just means that we went through multiple different resources trying to figure out what was helpful and what wasn't. And there were times where certain things were helpful and then they stopped being helpful. And so then we had to go backwards and say, now what do we do? Now what do we try? So number one is perseverance, because that means a lot. You have to have perseverance. Number 2 is what I just mentioned, and that is resources. You have to be good at finding resources, and you have to be willing to go out and search for resources. There are all kinds of resources out there So I'm going to name just a couple. There are all different types of therapy. We loved PCIT therapy. It helped multiple children that we have, but it did not help every child in our house that had behaviors. So it worked for some and not others. But it gave us a really good basis. That PCIT works off of something called the Pride Skills. I actually have a video. I will link it at the end of this one, because PCIT, I feel like, gives you a good base to start out with for those kids. And even if they don't have behaviors, I think it is just a good thing to implement in your home. So it works off the Pride Skills, and then pride means praise, reflect, imitate, describe, and enjoy. And you follow those in your house on a daily basis, and that's what we did. We did it with all the kids, and we did it every day. And I feel like it really gives those kids what they're looking for. Like the praise, especially. The praise is huge, but the other things also work. And you think it's not going to. When I learned about it, I thought, there's no way. The kids are going to know what I'm doing. And they didn't. And it worked wonders for some of the kids. Another thing as far as resources is sometimes the kids come into your care and they have behaviors because maybe their lack of self-esteem, or maybe it's because there's something else going on. We have multiple children in the house that have sensory issues. So we've got high need sensory kids, and we have one that does not like sensory input at all. So we have had to know what to give each child to help them out. So our high sensory needs kids, they need lots of input. When you give them a lot of input, it helps regulate their brain. And I'm going to tell you that we even see that in our 5-month-old. So anytime we give him sensory input, and there are multiple kids in his sibling group that need extra sensory input, like very high levels of sensory input. And so it was just something we kind of thought this may be something that he needs. So when he's fussy, if I give him sensory input, like pushing, I push on the bottom of his feet, or if I give him a squeeze, like I could squeeze on his legs, or sometimes when I hold him, I'll give him like a little squeeze hug, and that can stop him from fussing. But then as soon as I stop giving the sensory input, he'll start to fuss again. So I do know that he enjoys the sensory input. Also, we have like an adult blanket, and I can fold that up and lay that over his legs, and he really likes that too. So I'm noticing things already that he enjoys that extra sensory input, just like his siblings do. And the other siblings, actually it helps their brain calm down, and it helps their brain to regulate. So that extra sensory input helps regulate their brain when they're upset. Now that's important because that can be extremely helpful if you know that. So those sensory things. Now we had an OT diagnose several of our kids. So we just took them in for a screening and they were diagnosed, and then some of them, they went in for like weekly sessions, and they gave us all kinds of ideas on things that we could do for those children depending upon their sensory needs. Same with our sensory avoider. She does not like input. You could tell when she would walk in the grass, she did not want to walk in the grass without shoes on, and she always wanted to have shoes on everywhere. She did not like sensory input. She wouldn't swing, she wouldn't jump on our trampoline, and so she was always avoiding that input. So then you have to know what to do for those kids. We also had oral sensory kids who like to chew on everything, and they like the feeling of that stuff and the textures in their mouth. So all those things are helpful to know because it can help with behaviors. Also things like physical therapy, speech, things like that will help, because if those children feel behind, or like they don't have confidence, or maybe people make fun of them if they have a speech impediment, or we had one child who used to stutter. Those things can really wear on their self-confidence, and so that can also cause behaviors too. Sometimes you will need resources like a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Now, I'm not super fond of the psychology end of things, just because a lot of times we have found really good therapists. Now, we've used both psychologists and therapists, and not that there's anything wrong with the psychology aspect, but what we have found is that working with therapists, they're more like hands-on with you in the office, showing you things and giving you all kinds of ideas. Now, psychologists will do that too, But the ones that we have worked with are not nearly as hands-on as the therapists we have worked with. And maybe that is just in our area. But we've also had to have a psychiatrist for several of our children. And that is for the children who need a higher level of meds than just an MD can provide. So some of the children do have to be on meds, and we're not big med people. We only take medication if we have to. And but we also know that there are some cases where you have to. And so some of our kids do have medication that does help regulate their behaviors. We have found that with our ADHD kids, a couple of them also have ODD, and that is oppositional defiance disorder. And when they take the ADHD meds, it actually helps regulate their behaviors also. A big part of that is the impulsivity. If they're extremely impulsive, they won't think through things before they make a choice. And a lot of times that is why they have behaviors, or why they get in trouble a lot, or why they don't listen to you. You're thinking that they're just not listening to you, but a lot of times it's not that they don't want to listen to you. It's that they're so impulsive that they don't stop to think before they do something. So we have found that the ADHD meds really help with the behaviors, and also help a lot with that impulsivity piece, which helps them to be able to control their behaviors more. So that has been huge in helping some of our kids with some of their higher level of behaviors. All right, so we've talked about perseverance. We have talked about finding resources, and you really have to just go out there and dig and make phone calls and try to find as many resources as you can. We also have multiple other things here in our area that there are programs that will come into your home. There is IFP, which is Internal Family Preservation. They can help. There's just all kinds of places that you can find once you start looking. Now, it took me a while. I had to do a lot of digging at first, but then once I had those resources in place, then I was able to use those in every instance after that. Also, something I didn't talk about that can be huge is like teachers or your resource teachers. If your kids are in school, then a lot of times they can be helpful. We did a lot of working with our school when our kids were in public school, where we would have this open line of communication with the teachers and the resource teachers, so that way we could tell them as far as the sensory things that were going on, and then they could implement those in the classroom. And a lot of times when they did that stuff in the classroom, the kids would come home happier kids from school. So that, I feel like that open line of communication is huge. Letting them know what's going on at home. We would always let the school know what was going on in the house with behaviors, so they could watch for it on their end, so they weren't surprised. And also, it just kind of lets them know what's going on in the house, so that it's not some big surprise down the road if something happens. Another thing that I talked about is medication. So medication can be huge in helping the kids, especially if they have a high level of behaviors. Next is, you are not alone. So if you are currently dealing with behaviors with a child or children, it is going to be huge to find people that are going through the same thing as you. So I ended up finding foster moms in my area. A lot of them attended the daycare that my kids went to, and then they had other friends outside of there that they knew that were foster parents, and we formed a group of foster moms. And we would meet and we would text, and we made a Facebook group together, and there were about 15 of us, and we were able to communicate in that group, whether it be on Facebook or by phone or by text, and we were able to talk about what was going on. And those other moms understood, because some of them were going through the same thing. And then you feel like you're not alone, you're not a failure, because I'll tell you, when you're working with kids that have behaviors, it is so easy to think that you are a failure, because you think it's something you're doing. A lot of times you think why me? Why is this happening to me? Why do they give me these behaviors? And sometimes I've had kids that were perfect at school and daycare, and then they come home and they were like terrible. They had, super challenging behaviors at home. And I felt at first, when I didn't know what was going on, I felt really alone. I felt really hopeless. And I didn't know, I thought it was me. Now I know that it is not. And I know different things I can implement, but having those foster mom friends, or even, getting on the same page with your therapist, or having those teachers at school, that you can talk to and tell, here's what's going on, just so you don't feel like you're completely alone. But having somebody that's going through the same thing, or who has gone through the same thing to talk to, is huge. I felt so much better when I could talk to my foster mom friends and say, oh, here's what I'm seeing. Do you guys have any ideas or thoughts? Have any of you gone through this? And same thing. We had multiple foster moms in the group that said, oh, we're dealing with this right now, and I had already dealt with it. So I was able to give them ideas on things that I did. And that is so helpful. And not feeling like you're alone is huge. And not feeling like you're at fault is huge. So I want to make sure that if you're going through it right now, that you know that you are not alone. There are lots and lots of other people out there going through probably exactly what you've gone through. We have worked with so many different behaviors, and maybe someday I'll do a video about all of the things that we've worked with, but we have worked with a lot. So having people to talk to, that is another huge thing when you're dealing with high needs behavioral children. The last thing that I want to tell you about having a higher level of behavioral children is sometimes you have to do hard things. And this really stinks because it is so hard, but we have had 2 children that we have had to send to a PRTF. That is a pediatric residential treatment facility, or sometimes they call them RTCs, which is a residential treatment center. But that is not somewhere that you want to send your children, because that is the highest level of care that a child can have. And that is where they lock every door behind them. So every door in the facility is locked. The beds are bolted to the floor. The dressers are bolted to the floor. The kids they'll be in a group by age, and they will go room, to this room, and they'll lock the door behind them, and then they'll move them to this room for something else, and they'll lock the door behind them. And it is for those children that are just completely out of control, that, therapy didn't work, meds aren't working, where you've tried everything. You do have to have a therapist and a psychiatrist to recommend that your child go there. But this is the hardest thing Sean and I have ever had to do. We have had to send 2 children there because they were completely out of control, and we had tried everything. There was nothing we could do, and it was for their own safety. So we had one child who was there and ended up being there for 8 months, and then stepped down to another level of care and then came home. And that child, she was there for 8 months. That's a really long time. Usually the kids are there for about 3 or 4 months, and that was just because she did not want to get better. She kept trying to play the system. She even tried escaping by jumping their really tall iron fence and running. And so she ended up going down one level to a group home, and then did get to come home, which was exciting. I was super excited, especially after all that time. And you do at a PRTF, you work with the therapist and the child together weekly. And so that was the first time that we ever did that. It was devastating, but we didn't know what else to do. She kept sneaking out, and she would be gone for days. She would steal our cars, and it just got to a point where she was really putting herself in a lot of danger, and so we asked for more help. So asking for help is huge, And being able to do hard things is huge, because that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. We also, the second time was not any easier. We just knew she had gotten so out of control, beyond our help, was running, trying to run away, and just she was beyond our level of care. And kind of when you think about it, when you have a child that just continuously tries to run away, or when they are a danger to like other children in the house, you really have to think about everybody's safety, and that was not an easy choice either. Deciding to do that again, even after we had done it once, it was not any easier. I cried. I called the therapist and said, "Are you sure I'm doing the right thing?" I almost didn't send her, but I will tell you that she has made a complete 180. She is a totally different child, and she has come so far. We're so proud of her, and it is amazing once you've gone through that, and then you're able to get your child back, and they were able to do things like do a med wash, where they completely take them off all their meds, and then they start from the beginning, and they try different things, and they were able to try different things, and it was a secured environment, so that way if a medicine reacted bad, if she had a bad reaction to a medicine, she was still safe. And okay, so I hope I've made my point here. Sometimes you have to do hard things, especially when you have children that have such a high level of need behavioral wise. So doing hard things and being able to make that choice, even if you think you're going to get judged, even if it's like the hardest thing you've ever had to do, sometimes it is the best thing for that child. So, to recap everything I just said, I want to make sure that you guys heard me say that sometimes if you see someone out there struggling with their children or their child, make sure to give them some grace. Ask them if they need some help. Even if you have a friend that has a child, maybe take them for a day to give them a break, give them some respite. It can really be a huge wear out, but as long as you are able to do those things, to have the perseverance, to find other people to talk to get the resources in your area, be willing to put the kids on meds if they need them, and be willing to do hard things if you have to, you would be a great candidate to help those children that have the higher level of behaviors, because it can be super rewarding. We watch our kids make these milestones and get to a point where they're doing so well, and it is so rewarding to be able to look at those kids and say, "Oh my gosh, you have come so far, so far." And then learning things like the pride skills, or taking them to PCIT, because that can also be so beneficial for those kids. I hope you guys learned something today. If you have questions about raising children with high behaviors, comment down below and ask. Or if you're thinking about fostering or adopting children that have a higher level of needs, let me know down below. I will see you guys next time. Bye.